Hello everybody, welcome to jurycentral.com online classes for law exams. So today I will be discussing with you the new labor laws for Jamia Millia Islamia LLM entrance examination. So let me tell you, the new labor codes are not in force, but this topic is important from the examination point of view, and in this topic I would also be covering the existing provisions of the labor laws which are in force. So let us start. So first I would discuss with you the deals that we are offering to you. So we have got two products. In the first product you will get 5-year solved paper of JMI LLM with subjective question solution, and the second one you will get the MCQ questions, that means the model questions for Jamia Millia Islamia LLM entrance examination. The link is in the description. You may follow the link and you can purchase the product by paying the least amount of rupees 500. So now let us start with the topic. The central government proposes to replace 29 existing labor laws with 4 codes. The objective is to simplify and modernize labor regulation. So the government is actually replacing 29 existing labor laws with the given 4 codes. And let us see what are the codes for labor laws. The labor law of the 4 labor codes are Code on Wages 2019, Code on Social Security 2020, Industrial Relations Code 2020, and Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020. So these are the 4 codes, and it received the presidential assent between 2019 and 2020. However, barring the provisions relating to Central Advisory Board on minimum wages and identification of workers for social security benefits through Aadhaar, the central government is yet to bring the labor codes into effect. So barring the Central Advisory Board on minimum wages and identification of workers for social security benefits through Aadhaar. So these are the 2 provisions which are in force, and the codes, the given codes, are not in force. The implementation process is delayed as states are yet to finalize their rules under this code, because labor law is a concurrent subject and states haven't finalized their draft rules regarding these codes, which rules would assume relevance for many employers in the private sector. So it is assumed that these labor codes will be benefiting the workers in the private sector. Since labor is a concurrent subject under the Constitution of India, both the center and the states would have to notify rules under the codes to bring this into force in their respective jurisdiction. Now this is important. Since labor law is a concurrent subject, so both center and states has to notify the laws in their respective jurisdictions by notifying the rules. So both of them have to notify the rules to make it operate in the given jurisdictions. Many states have not yet finalized the rules under the new codes, but some like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, Orissa, Punjab, Gujarat, Karnataka and Uttarakhand have already circulated the draft rules. So barring these few states, the other states have not yet notified the labor code rules, and this is a reason why it is not in force, although it is passed and received the presidential assent. Then why the code? So let us understand why the central government has brought this code, replacing 29 existing labor laws. The second National Commission on Labour took place in 1999. In 2002, the Commission submitted a report which stated that the existing labor laws were too complex with archaic provisions and inconsistent definitions. The Commission's recommendation was to consolidate existing labor laws into broader groups such as industrial relations, wages, social security, safety and welfare, and working conditions. So this is the reason why the main purpose of bringing this code is to rationalize the labor laws, which has been very complex and the definitions have been inconsistent. So first we'll start with Code of Wages 2019. So this bill actually replaces 4 laws. And what are these? Payment of Wages Act 1936, Payment of Minimum Wages Act 1948, Payment of Bonus Act 1965, Equal Remuneration Act 1976. And let us see the applicability. The wage code envisages in uniform applicability of the provisions of timely payment of wages and minimum wages to all employees irrespective of the wage ceiling and sectors. So this is actually applicable to all kinds of employees and workers irrespective of the wage ceiling and also the sectors. Previous labor codes applied mainly to organized sectors of workers and employees, but the new labor code will include unorganized sectors of employees such as freelancers, gig workers, platform workers, etc. as well. So this is the benefit of this code, as it is also incorporating the unorganized sector, unlike the earlier labor laws which only has given the benefits to the organized labor. Then the central government now hold power to set a standard national floor minimum wage. Now the central government has the power to set a national floor minimum wage for all kinds of workers. State governments will not be able to set a minimum wage below this standard. So this is the standard that has been set by the central government, and if state wants to pay, it has to pay according to this, or it has to make its rules according to the minimum floor wage set by the central government, and it shall not be below this ceiling. Clear definitions of wages, allowances and basic which will stay same across act and law. So there are 4 codes, and in all the 4 codes the definitions are the same. And what are the definitions? This is wages, allowance and basic. The most prominent rule under the new labor codes is the plan to cap employee salary allowances at 50% of CTC, that means cost to company. This means the basic salary of an employee has to be at least 50% of the CTC. So this is also one of the benefit of the new labor code, and it is actually setting the basic salary of an employer, and it has to be 50% of the cost to company. Then what are the other advantages? 15 minutes overtime payment. There is also a rule incoming for any 15 minutes for or more overtime will be attracting overtime payment to the employees. So if a worker is working 50 minutes more, then he shall be eligible for overtime payment. 15 minutes more of his working hours. 48 hours set work time for 1 week. So let us see. The government has also made it clear that 48 hours is the maximum limit for 1 week work capacity, and the employers are flexible to choose this work time and make it available in 4 days, 5 days or 6-day week structure. So the maximum working capacity has been set to 48 hours and it shall not exist, and the employee has been, the worker has given the choice that whether they want to offer this 48 hours in 4 days, 5 days or 6-day week structure. Then inspector cum facilitator. The erstwhile enactments had the concept of inspectors to carry out inspections and examinations to ensure compliance of the enactments. So this is the earlier rule. Now under the wage code, the inspector regime is replaced with inspector cum facilitator, who shall be a facilitator towards compliance and not just an inspecting authority. The inspector cum facilitator is required to provide the employer an opportunity to rectify the non-compliance within a specified time before initiating any prosecution proceedings. So now this is the new concept. This code is actually providing for inspector cum facilitator, and his main function is to see the compliances. The provident fund contribution is required to be a proportion of 50% of gross pay under the new code. So this is according to the new labor laws. This would result in the restructuring of the salaries, as the new requirements under the codes will increase the provident fund liabilities on the employer. So this is actually good. So far the employers have been destructing wages into various allowances for the basic wages to be less to reduce the provident fund and income tax expenses of the company. So it is believed that this code will actually increase the burden of the employer, as they also need to definite or separate the basic wages and the provident fund. Doubts about the new salary structure remain, but employees can expect higher post-retirement benefits due to an increase in provident fund contribution. It is also believed that because a ceiling has been set that a 50% of the gross pay has to be deposited in the provident fund, and also like the basic pay. So it is believed that now the employee will actually take home less salary than it used to be. Like, there is also an advantage. Like, if the employer is getting retired, then he will get more amount after his retirement. Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020. So this is the second code. The code subsumes 633 provisions of 13 major labor laws into one single code with 143 provisions. The laws to be subsumed are, so these are the acts which are included. These are actually subsumed. Now all this act has been included under one code, this Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. Let me read. The Factories Act 1948, the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970, the Mines Act 1952, the Dock Workers Safety, Health and Welfare Act 1986, the Building and Other Construction Workers Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1996, the Plantations Labor Act 1951, the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979. So there are total number of 13 acts which have been subsumed under this new act, in short OSH. Occupational Safety and Hazards, Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. Then the Cine Workers and Cinema Theatre Workers Act 1981, the Motor Transport Workers Act 1961, the Sales Promotion Employees Act 1976, the Beer and Cigar Workers Act 1966. The main acts are the Factories Act 1948 and the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970. So these are the and this one, the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979. So these three acts are very important under this code. So we'll see the applicability of the code is on factory having 20 or more workers. So this is important. So the applicability is differs from act to act. So in case of Factories Act, it is only applicable if the factory is employing 20 or more workers and the process of manufacturing is being performed with machines involving 40 or more workers. So if the the factory is involving with machines, if the factory is actually involved with the business of machine, that it shall have more than 40 workers. So what are the key changes? Now we will see, this is important. The limit of a female workers for the age of creating crash facility for the children below 6 years of age would increase to 50 female workers from currently 30. As per the Factories Act, if any establishment has 500 or more workers, then occupier would appoint welfare officers, but post implementation of this code, limit shall be reduced to 250 employees. The establishment employing 100 workers will be responsible to provide canteen facility, reduction from current limit to 250. Provisions have been made for the employment of female employees for working beyond 7 p.m. till 6 a.m. with their consent and conditions relating to safety, holiday working hours. Workers cannot be required to work more than 6 days per week and will be entitled to 1 day off for every 20 days of work and 1 off every week. So these are the important key changes. I hope you understood. Like earlier, a creche facility was provided to a factory in which only 30 female workers, 30 or more than 30 female workers are actually in employment. So now the ceiling has been increased to 50, and then there is a new concept of welfare officer, and it has to be appointed if the establishment has 500 or more workers. And then there is a provision of canteen facility that if the establishment is employing 100 workers, then it will be responsible to provide canteen facility. And others like the working hours and etc. I have already told you. Key definitions like wages, banking, company and core activity of an establishment has been inserted. Then, contrary to earlier provisions, women workers are entitled to be employed in all establishments for all type of work, including hazardous process, subject to the conditions that the government may require the employer to provide adequate safeguards prior to their employment in hazardous or dangerous operations. So now female can also be employed in hazardous working process. So the rider is, or say the condition is that it has to provide all adequate safeguards if the woman is employed in hazardous or dangerous operations. Then next, employment of contract labor and interstate migrant worker. The OSH code has modified the number of minimum contract labor to 50 from 20 for the OSH code to apply. So suppose if in an establishment there are at least 50 contract labor are working, then only in those establishments the OSH code will apply. Earlier the ceiling was 20. Welfare facilities as specified under the OSH code are to be provided by the principal employer of the establishment to the contract labor employed in such establishment. Then in a step that should prove beneficial, the OSH code provides for a common license in respect of a factory, industrial premises for beedi and cigar work and engaging contract labor. So suppose if an industry is actually employed in beedi and cigar work, then there is a provision that the factory will be provided a common license. It has further been clarified that no contractor is permitted to engage any contract labor if it doesn't procure a license under and in accordance with the OSH code. So those kind of establishment will not be permitted to keep any contract labor if it doesn't procure a license. Then the OSH code has also safeguarded the rights of the interstate migrant workers by ensuring that the contractor extends all facilities as are available to a worker under the various labor laws to interstate migrant workers as well. Furthermore, the employer of every applicable establishment is required to pay to every interstate migrant worker a lump sum fare for to and fro journey to his native place from the place of his establishment. So a duty is cast upon the employer to ensure that the migrant worker shall be paid for his journey from native place to the place of his employment. Then the penalties. Every person in charge and responsible to perform company's business will be held liable for any offence committed by the company during the time employed to pay a fine of rupees 10,000 if violates the code. So this is the penalty. Employer cannot obstruct the inspector on duty from performing his role. If done, so will result in imprisonment up to 3 months and fine up to rupees 1 lakh. And the most important is offence costing life of an employee. The employer will be punishable with imprisonment up to 2 years or fine up to rupees 5 lakhs or both. Then we'll deal with the most important code. This is the Industrial Relations Code 2020. If I talk about the Industrial Disputes Act, then it is actually said that it is the mother of all labor laws. And by this code, it is actually subsuming 3 existing labor laws. And the laws are the Trade Unions Act 1926, the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946 and the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. All these 3 acts are very, very important. So let us see. It defines workers to include beside all persons employed in a skilled or unskilled manual, technical, operational and clerical capacity, supervisory staff drawing up to rupees 18,000 a month as salary. So it defines workers. Under this code, worker is defined as a person who is employed in whether skilled or unskilled manual, technical, operation, and those persons who are or any supervisory staff or those persons who are drawing a monthly salary of rupees 18,000. It introduces fixed term employment, giving employers the flexibility to hire workers based on requirements through a written contract. Fixed term employees should be treated on par with permanent workers in terms of hours of work, wages, allowances and other benefits, including statutory benefits such as gratuity. So this code also provides for fixed term employment, and it is given that a fixed term employment should be treated on par with the permanent workers in terms of working hours, wages and allowances and etc. or other benefits like gratuity. Standing orders. The code says any establishment that employs 300 or more workers must prepare standing orders relating to the classification of workers, manner of intimating to them periods and hours of work, holidays, paid days, etc., shifts, attendance, conditions for leave, termination of employment or suspension, besides the means available for redress of grievances. Earlier, the 2019 bill applied these to units with 100 employees or more. So it is actually criticized because standing orders are nothing but it is actually rules for maintaining the standards of the the behaviors of the workers. In terms of what? In terms of their hours of work, holidays, pay days, shift attendance and everything. So all these criteria are actually regulated under the standing orders, and it is also the standing orders are only applicable if the establishment is employing 300 or more workers. But earlier the 2019 bill provided for those kind of establishment in which at least 100 or more persons are working, and now it is increased to 300. Now we'll see what is the meaning of standing order. The threshold has been raised to 300 in the 2020 code. It confers on the appropriate government, that is the center or the state governments, the power to exempt with or without conditions any industrial establishment or class of industrial establishments from all or any of the provisions of the code if it is satisfied that adequate provision exists to fulfill its objective. And again it is criticized that these standing orders can also be avoided in case if the appropriate government thinks so that those kind of industrial establishment doesn't require any standing order. So meaning is what? The rules of conduct for workmen employed in industrial establishments, like I already tell you, like how the workman shall conduct, and these are the rules which has been given under standing orders, like their working hours, then according to their like how they should be terminated and everything. Changes in the trade union. Where there is more than one trade union in an establishment, the sole negotiating union status will be given to the one that has 51% of the employees as its members. It has been brought down from the 75% requirement in the 2019 version, where no union qualifies under this criterion. The employer must constitute a negotiating council consisting of representatives drawn from the various unions, with only those with at least 20% of employees as its members. So it actually says the changes has been made in the trade union regarding the recognition of a union, and it said and the recognition will be given to the union regarding to its negotiating status if it has 51% of the employees at its worker. And actually in the 2019 version it has been given that this union shall have 75% of the workers, and now it has been brought down to 51%. And in case if any council doesn't have the required criteria, then it can constitute a negotiating council with only those with at least 20% of employees at its member. Then what are the provisions of layoff and closure? This is very, very important. The provisions that require the prior permission of the government for layoff, retrenchment and closure are made applicable to all the establishments that had employed 300 or more workers on an average per working day in the preceding 12 months. So the provisions of layoff, closure or retrenchment will apply in an industrial employment in which there are 300 or more workers and who has been working in the last since the last 12 months. The code also allows the government to raise this threshold by notification. Earlier the ceiling was only 100, but now it has been increased to 300, and it can also be further increased by notification. The layoff should be deemed illegal if it is effected without permission or is done despite refusal of permission, but it will not be so if the employee had been offered alternative employment. So suppose now generally what happens that if a layoff is illegal, in case if the layoff is illegal, then the worker is actually paid compensation. But suppose the worker has been given an alternative employment, then he will not be qualified for any compensation. And also the code prescribes notice period for payment in lieu of notice period and prior government permission before retrenchment of anyone who has been in continuous service for a year or more. So for retrenching a person, the establishment has to get permission from the government if the employer is working for a year or more. Such a permission requirement is in place also for closure of a unit, with the application to be filed 90 days prior to the intended closure. And if a establishment wants to go for closure, then it has to give a 90 days prior notice to the central government. And now we'll understand what do we mean by layoff, retrenchment, closure, etc. How does the new code affect the right to strike? And this topic is very, very important. Now we'll see. The code prohibits strikes and lockouts in all industrial establishments without notice. And no unit shall go on strike in breach of contract without giving 60 days before the strike or within 14 days of giving such a notice or before the expiry of any date given in the notice for the strike. Now let us understand. So first of all, this code is actually prohibiting any kind of strike or lockout before without giving any notice. And these the days are also fixed. The period is also fixed for giving the notice. So earlier it was only 6 weeks, but now it has been increased to 60 days. So if a unit wants to go for strike, then it has to give a notice 60 days prior before going to the strike, and also or within 14 days of giving such a notice. And suppose if he has given the notice, then within 14 days the union cannot go for a strike. And also further, there should be no strike during any conciliation proceedings or within 7 days of the conclusion of such proceedings. This is also a limitation which has been provided. Or during proceedings before an industrial tribunal or 60 days after their conclusion or during arbitration proceeding. So suppose if the unit or say the union is actually suppose if there is any conciliation proceedings going on, or if it has been ended, then there are certain days within which the the union body cannot again go for strike. Similar restrictions have been given on the employer from announcing a lockout. So the similar restriction has also been given to the employer before announcing a lockout. So lockout is nothing but lockout is actually it is a countermeasure of strike. The Industrial Disputes Act 1947 Section 22 had placed such restriction on announcing strikes only in respect of public utility services. The present act, that is the Section 22 of the Industrial Dispute Act, only places restriction on announcing strikes in public utility services. But the present code is actually extending it to all establishment. Like this period of notice has been given only in those establishments which are into the services of public utility. But now this code is actually extending to all establishment, whether it's a public utility, whether it is involved in public utility services or non-public utility services. Then we'll see the layoff and retrenchment, the difference between layoff and retrenchment. This is important, and this has been given in the chapter 5A, sections 25A to 25Z of Industrial Dispute Act. So let us understand layoff. Section 2 KKK defines layoff. Retrenchment. Section 200 defines retrenchment. Layoff is purely temporary. Retrenchment is permanent, of course. The reappointment of retrenched person is not bar at law. They may again be appointed in appropriate classes. Then in layoff, the employer is compelled to refuse employment under certain circumstances, that is a shortage of raw materials, power, finance, etc., which arise temporarily in the nature. In retrenchment, the employer lessens overburden employees over circumstances, that is government policy, laws in some department, and etc. Then where the employer declares layoff, the industry stops its function. While the process of retrenchment is going on, the industry doesn't stop its function, it continues to function. So these are the differences between layoff and retrenchment. Layoff, first of all, layoff is a temporary in nature, and retrenchment is actually permanent. Then in layoff, all the employees in a group of employees are refused to employment. In retrenchment, the last comes first goes service. So in retrenchment, generally what happens, the person who last comes actually retrenched initially. The conditions precedent is not necessary in case of layoff. The condition precedents are to be followed in case of retrenchment. Notice, notice, retrenchment, compensation, notice to government in the prescribed manner, and it's given under section 25F of the Industrial Dispute Act. The laid off employees are paid laid off compensation under section 25C. The payment of gratuity doesn't arise in layoff, but in retrenchment, the retrenched employee are paid retrenchment compensation plus payment of gratuity. All the laid off employees should be taken back in their usual post as soon as the layoff is lifted out. Re-employment of retrenched worker also takes place in certain circumstances. See, re-employment is not possible in cases of retrenchment, but it actually takes place in rarest of the rare cases. But in laid off, it is not so. As soon as the issues which actually encourages the employer to lay off the employees, and as soon as the issues go off, the employees are again taken back to the same position. But this is not the case in the retrenchment. The re-employment of retrenched worker also takes place in certain circumstances, but it is not mandatory that all the retrenched workers should be appointed, and this given under section 25H. Now we'll see the difference between lockout and closure. So this is a landmark judgment, management of Express Newspaper Limited versus its workmen. So in this case, the difference between lockout and closure has been defined. Now we'll understand. Lockout defined as, it is under section 2L of the Act, temporary closure of the place of work which is curable. Closure is defined under section 2CC of the Act, permanent closing of a place of work and is uncurable. So lockout is for a limited period of time. It is temporary in nature, but closure is actually permanent closing of a place, and it has been defined under section 2 clause CC of the Industrial Dispute Act. In lockout, place of business is closed, but business is not closed. But in closure, both the place of business and the business is closed. The closure is not a weapon in the hands of the employer, but the lockout is a weapon in the hands of the employer, as closure affects both employer and workman. In closure, relationship between employer and workman comes to an end, whereas in lockout, the relationship actually survives. In bona fide lockout, it can be illegal. The lockout, if violate the provision of 24 of the Act, but closure is always a legal closure. See, lockout, even if the lockout is bona fide, it can still be termed as illegal, but closure is always legal. But the closure is always legal between employer and workman doesn't come to an end. Lockout is declared as an answer to strike or whenever an industrial dispute has taken place. The closure may be due to economic reason or unrecoverable loss, and it is not an industrial dispute. So lockout is generally, it is actually a weapon which is used by the employer as an answer to the strike, and closure is not something which is done intentionally, but it is actually due to economic reason that the place of business is shut down. The lockout may turn into closure, but the closure will not turn into lockout. So the lockout can be turned into closure, but closure doesn't mean it is a and if the uh, alternate employment is provided by the employer, then the lockout compensation shall not be granted to the worker, as the worker is already getting wages from alternative employment as per section 25F of the Industrial Dispute Act. So like I have already told you, like if there is a lockout in any place of business and the worker is given an alternative employment, then he cannot claim a lockout compensation which is provided under section 25F. Difference between lockout and strike. So now we'll understand what's the difference between lockout and strike, and this has been given under chapter 5, sections 22 to 25. The strike is defined under section 2Q and lockout under section 12. So earlier we have seen the difference between lockout and closure, and now we'll see the difference between strike and lockout. The strike is a weapon in the hands of workers and lockout in the hands of the employer. The strike is a retaliation to the lockout if lockout happens first, and vice versa. Then the strikes happen because of economic factors like bonus, wages, etc. So if there is a dispute between the employer and the employee relating to bonus, wages, etc., so generally strike happens. Whereas lockout is declared both due to economic as well as non-economic factor like endanger to life, political pressure, etc. And it is also imposed intentionally and deliberately. Strike can be bifurcated into the legal and illegal strike, and justified and unjustified strike. But a lockout can be further bifurcated into such divisions. Like strike can be bifurcated into many divisions, but a lockout is a lockout and it cannot be bifurcated. Ramchandra Spinning Mills. So in this case, this is a case relating to strike and lockout. So let us understand, in an industry when a strike takes place, to which as a countermeasure employer takes out lockout. What action can amount to lockout? Objective and extended meaning of lockout. Two measures normally taken by the employer. The court said that whenever an employer takes these four actions, it would amount to lockout. So in this case, it has been said that what are the actions of the employer that is taken as a lockout. If an employer shuts down his place of business as retaliation to strike which initiated in his industry, will amount to lockout. That next, whenever employer doesn't want to temporarily shut down his place but he was forced by his workers to do so and he has no other remedy, will amount to lockout. Third condition is whenever the employer has to act belligerent, will amount to lockout. However, if the employer is shutting down his place of business even for temporarily because he is unable to sell his goods or shortage of raw material or unable to get power or fuel to run industry or losing money, will not amount to lockout. So this has been said that lockout cannot happen due to economic reasons. The objective of the lockout is to prevent violence, to protect his property and ensure there is no threat to life to anybody. Mere suspension of work will not amount to a lockout, but there has to intention attached to it, make it lockout. Then next we'll deal with this case. This is Engineer Mazdoor Sabha versus SD Belgramin. There was a serious misconduct on the part of the workers. A fight broke out between them and created a threat of life both for management, people and workers as well. Because it endangered the employer of the industry, he declared it as a lockout. Issue is a lockout justified or not, and are the workers entitled to wages or not? I hope you understood. So there, some fight actually have arisen between the workers and the employers, and because the employer felt that it is actually, their life is threatened, the employer declared lockout. Court held that whenever lockout happens due to serious misconduct on the part of workers, in the consequences of endangering the lives of the workers and management people who are working for the employer, which could be foreseen, in such a situation, the lockout will be justified. Lockout is declared by the employer when there is an industrial dispute. Employer, in order to ensure there is no loss of life in the industry, and employer has the apprehension that the strike may break into lockout, it will be justified lockout. So under this condition, if there is a serious misconduct on the part of the workers, then the lockout which has been done to save the lives of the employer or its people, then it's a justified lockout. the employer is not in absolute obligation to pay the wages in a justified lockout, but it is only in unjustified lockout the employer is entitled to pay wages. The next case is Krishna Sugar Mills versus State of Uttar Pradesh. Krishna Sugar Mill was closed down for 2 days because the workmen assaulted 2 employer officers of the industry. So it's the same facts. It was a state-run entity, public utility service under Section 2 Clause N. The lockout was declared without giving notice. The court held that when the employer closed down his place of business for 2 days, it will amount to lockdown. That's what the court actually held. Though court agreeing with the fact that it's a lockout, but in public utility service, if the lockout is declared without notice, makes it illegal or unjustified, and the employer is a violation the provision of Section 24 of the Industrial Dispute Act. Hence, for these 2 days, workmen will be entitled to payment of wages. So, this is actually, in this case, the court actually held different to what it actually held in the Engineer Mazdoor Sabha's case. It said that although the lockout was done to save the employers from any major threat, but still it failed to give any notice. And although it's a public utility service, but still the establishment has the obligation to issue a notice according to Section 24. And this is the reason why the court directed that the workmen will be entitled to payment of wages. So last we will be dealing with the Code on Social Security 2020. So in this code is actually subsuming 9 existing labor laws, which are this: Employees Compensation Act 1923, the Employees State Insurance Act 1948, the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1952, then the Employment Exchange Act, the Maternity Benefit Act 1961, this one is important, Payment of Gratuity Act, Senior Workers Welfare Fund Act, Building and Other Construction Workers Cess Act 1986, Unorganized Workers Social Security Act. So these are the 9 acts. So let us see the applicability. So the Code on Social Security 2020 is applicable to any establishment subject to size threshold as may be notified for making certain benefits mandatory. All eligible establishments are required to be registered under the code. So this is actually required, like all the establishment need to be registered under the Code on Social Security unless they are already registered under any other labor law. The EPF, that means the Employee Provident Fund, will be applicable only in those establishments in which 20 or more employees are working. ESI shall be applicable to establishment with 10 or more employees. So in those establishments, the ESI will be applicable, that means Employee State Insurance, and also to all establishments which carry out hazardous or life-threatening work as notified by the central government. So if the establishment is carrying out any hazardous or life-threatening work, then the ESI Act will be applicable. Then the Code of Social Security 2020 not only recommends or administers schemes for unorganized sector workers, but also dwells into the welfare of gig and platform workers, where such schemes were not applicable till now, and the schemes shall be funded by the central government, state governments and aggregators as mentioned in the 7th schedule. So this these sectors are also included under the Code on Social Workers, and these persons, the persons who are employed in unorganized sectors, are also included. Gratuity. The Social Security Code has fixed different threshold with respect to eligibility for gratuity of permanent and fixed term employees. Gratuity shall be payable to eligible employees by every shop or establishment in which 10 or more employees are employed. So gratuity, the concept of gratuity is applicable in those shop or establishment in which 10 or more employees are working in the preceding 12 months, or say in the last year. Gratuity shall be payable to an employee on the termination of his employment after he has rendered continuous service for not less than 5 years. So only those persons who are continuing the service for the last 5 years, then those persons shall be eligible for receiving gratuity, or on his superannuation, or on his retirement or resignation, on his death or disablement due to accident or disease, on termination of his contract period during a period under fixed term employment. So even a fixed term employee can also claim gratuity benefits. Then employee provident fund. So this is actually is applicable. The SS code has altered the applicability of employees provident fund scheme, which now will be applicable to every establishment in which 20 or more employees are employed. So EPF will be applicable in those establishments in which at least 20 or more employees are employed. The central government may establishment of provident fund where the contributions paid by the employer to the fund shall be 10% of the wages for the time being payable to each of the employee. So the central government is actually establishing a provident fund, and where contribution is actually 10% of the wages. Okay, and then the employer's contribution shall be equal to the contribution payable by the employer in respect of him, and the employer's contribution shall also be equal to what the employer is actually contributing in the provident fund. Then the central government may by notification increase the contribution percentages to 12% for both employers and employees of certain establishment. So now presently it is only 10% contributions has to be made by the employer to the provident fund, but the central government may increase the ceiling to 12% for both employers and employees. So both employers and employees has to deposit it the amount of their basic wages in the employee's provident fund. Then penalty. If any person fails to pay any amount of gratuity to which an employee is entitled to, he shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine which may extend to rupees 50,000 rupees, or with both. So the punishment is 1 year and 50,000 rupees. Maternity benefit, most important topic. The maternity benefits shall be applicable to every shop or establishment in which 10 or more employees are employed. So it is actually applicable in those shop or establishment in which 10 or more than 10 employees are employed, or were employed on any day of the preceding 12 months. So this person has to be working for the last 1 year, and such other shops or establishments notified by the appropriate government. No employer nor woman can knowingly employ a woman work in any establishment during 6 weeks immediately following the day of her delivery. So suppose if that woman is actually expecting her date of delivery after 6 weeks, then in those 6 weeks she shall not be employed, or in the case of miscarriage or medical termination of pregnancy. Then a woman shall be entitled to maternity benefit if she has actually worked in an establishment of the employer from whom she claims maternity benefit for not less than 80 days in the 12 months immediately preceding the day of her expected delivery. So the benefit of maternity relief is also applicable in those establishments in which she has been working or she has worked not less than 80 days in the preceding 12 months immediately preceding the date of her expected delivery. The maximum period for which any woman shall be entitled to benefit shall be 26 weeks. So earlier it was 12 weeks, and now it has been increased to 26 weeks, of which not more than 8 weeks shall precede the expected date of her delivery. That means the woman can go for maternity leave not more than 8 weeks before the expected date of her delivery. However, the maximum period entitled to maternity benefit by a woman having 2 or more surviving children shall be 12. So suppose if the woman is having 2 or more than 2 children, then the maternity relief or the maternity benefits will be reduced to 12 weeks, of which not more than 6 weeks shall precede the date of her expected delivery. Then penalty. If any person is in contravention of the provisions of maternity benefits or dismisses, discharges, reduces in rank or otherwise penalizes a woman employer, fails to provide any maternity benefit to which a woman is entitled, then in those cases he shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which extend to 6 months, or with fine which may extend to rupees 50,000, or with both. Then social security organization. So the social security code also provides for the establishment of social security organizations. These are Central Board of Trustees of Employees Provident Fund, Employees State Insurance Corporation, National Social Security Board for Unorganized Workers, State Unorganized Workers Social Security Board, State Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Boards. So this has been your session for today, and I hope you all have liked it. Do not forget to give a like, share and subscribe to the channel. And if you're looking for the previous year question paper on Jamia Millia and the practice set, you can purchase the same from our website called www.jurycentral.com. I have already shared the link in the description box below. So with this note, I am signing off. Have a great day.